Welcome everybody. My name is Dee Denton, and I am with the San Bernardino County Master Food Preservers. I joined the Master Food Preservers in 2017 as a volunteer, and I joined as a volunteer out of the need to start preserving products that were being produced on my parents' property. Just because we had so much waste. So I grew up in the city, didn't really do much preservation growing up. And then as I got older and then had a little more, had 1 minute of spare time, I took on becoming a volunteer and became very passionate about sharing information about food preservation and food waste with anybody that would listen. So we're going to go ahead. Today, we're going to talk about some dehydration basics. I thought that this might be a fun presentation to bring to everybody. This was presented for one of our groups earlier this year, and it's kind of a very quick and easy method of preservation, and one that's often overlooked, even by master food preservers such as myself. I don't do as much dehydration as I should. It's one of those things that I need to really work on because it's really a very quick and easy way to do some food preservation. So a little bit about our program. We are a division of the Agricultural Natural Resources. So you will see us listed as UCANR. We are a trained group of volunteers teaching research-based practices of safe home food preservation to California residents, and also food safety. It's very important that we are about food safety first and home preservation second. And then any products or company names that you'll see through this presentation, these are just examples. They're not endorsements of any kind, but we do have things that we like to show for everybody. So please, if you have any questions about anything on here, feel free to contact us, and realize that we are not endorsing any product that we show in our presentation. So we've already kind of gone over this, but just a little bit more. We're going to turn off our cameras to save bandwidth. Our presentation may be recorded, and then keep your microphone on mute. And then if you feel free to ask questions through the chat as we're going along, or we're a small group today, you can unmute and ask questions. So a little bit about basic food safety. We want to make sure that we are washing our hands frequently. It's really important, especially with everything that has gone on this past almost 2 years now, that basic hand washing is really a way to cut down on a lot of things that could be transmitted. If you have any cuts or burns, you want to make sure that you're got them bandaged up and then gloved up to make sure that you do not run any risk of contaminating any products that you're working with. You want to wash your surfaces, knives and cutting boards, and any tools that you're using before you're using or after you've used them, and then you put them away for storage. You want to keep your hair pulled back or covered. This is it's a big one for me. I always forget, and then I always realize, oh, I need to get that done. So it's always good to come up with a routine. And then using an apron. Using an apron really also gets overlooked as well, but an apron not only prevents food from getting on your clothes, but from anything that's on your clothes getting put into your food or your product that you're preserving at the time or preparing at the time. So dehydration is probably the oldest form of food preservation. It's easy, it's inexpensive, it has more nutrition than canning for some items. It can be done without special equipment. It's compact and lightweight for you to store your items, and your product can be used in various ways once you've preserved them. And then it stops growth of bacteria, yeasts, and molds. So it's always nice to get into a preservation method that doesn't require a huge amount of investment on your part. So one caution is that drying does not kill microorganisms. It only renders them inactive. You want to make sure that you treat all rehydrated food as if it were fresh food. So once you've rehydrated it, it's not something that you think that you can sit out on the counter and leave it sit there overnight. That's one thing that you'd want to actually place in your refrigerator and make sure that you're not going to have any possible problems with microorganisms or any spoilage. So food preservation's goal is to keep the foodborne pathogens from growing in our food. And that comes from covers all aspects of food preservation, whether you are dehydrating or you're pressure canning or you're boiling water bath canning. So a few drawbacks of dehydration is that food prep times can be increased because you do have to do some planning on that part. Dehydrated foods has a different taste than a fresh version of food. So maybe not everything would be a plus candidate for being dehydrated. And then food is condensed and it was easily to eat over or eat extra sugar fruits. So when, like for this example here, this picture that you have of these apple slices, it's probably upwards of 4 pounds of apples that are in there. And as you're snacking on them, they're probably extremely tasty. And you could wind up overeating before you realize it. So just realizing that when you dehydrate your food, it does shrink it, but the content, the sugary content of your food is still there in that. So you could overeat quickly with that. And then dried fruits tends to stick to your teeth. So that could be an issue, especially if you have little ones and then you have to make sure that you get those teeth brushed really, really good. So dehydration methods that we have at our disposal are air drying, sun drying, solar drying, and then auto dehydration, which I'll show pictures of that a little bit later, or actually coming up here soon. And then just a typical, a standard dehydrator. So for air drying, you can dry indoors or outdoors. And what thing you need to be very cautious of is the humidity on there. So if you have, in California, we are pretty much very spoiled. We don't have that humid climate, but there have been times when we have that humidity in the air. And that's when drying indoors and outdoors could be problematic. Now, sun drying, best between 80 and 95 degrees, which we have the luxury of being in California, of having these temperatures quite frequently during our year. One thing that you do need to be aware of and worry about combating is flies and insects. So you want to make sure that you're covering with netting. And there's a couple of pictures that you have here. We have some zucchini slices covered with just like a fine mesh cloth. And then this other hanging mesh bag that you see over here, I have seen those on the internet advertised that you can actually just stake these out there in the garden or wherever is conveniently passed by you multiple times during the day. That you can put your produce in and dry that out with the sun and have the sun do your drying there. So let me get back here. Solar drying. Now, solar drying, it's similar to a solar oven. And this is an option that's really only going to be available when the sun is shining because you do need to have that sun to generate that heat. And then kind of a drawback with that solar drying is the temperature can fluctuate. And you can see with the solar dryer here that there's a temperature gauge here. And this is actually a pretty nice unit where you have this in here and then you have your trays that are in there. I have not actually used a solar dryer, but this is definitely, especially if you have a handy person that could make one of these items for you fairly inexpensively. Now here's the auto dehydration. And yes, this is the dash of a car. One of our fellow master food preservers is an avid dehydrator, and she takes the opportunity to dehydrate product in her car during the summer months. Now, there's a few cautions that you need to be concerned about when you're using auto dehydration. Is that A, it may not be very share worthy when you're at a school function, since this is a community garden and school garden type presentation. But for your home use, a car may be something more suitable. You would need to make sure that you have a tray that's appropriate for drying on your dash. And then you want to make sure you can see that she has covers underneath this. You may not be able to see them actually, but you would want to make sure that you have placemats or covers underneath the bottom of your product to make sure they don't make a big mess in your car. There's no money involved in actually doing this because you are using the heat in your vehicle and then the free sun that's available to us. You can use any type of tray that you have as long as you have the ability to have some vents going underneath that tray. And then the big drawback is that whatever you've dried in your vehicle, you are going to have a built-in scent aroma in your vehicle of that product. So if you this scent that was left behind in this was much of tomatoes and pizza scenting, because she actually had scented them or flavored them with a little bit of oregano on there. So it smelled like pizza sauce in her vehicle. So could be a drawback, but could not be a drawback as well, just depending on what your likes are. And then let me see. And then advantages and disadvantages is that you can operate without the constraint and supervision of night and day. A disadvantage is possibly that it uses electricity or gas. A disadvantage and an advantage is that it creates heat. So during the summer months, you not necessarily want to have extra heat created in your house, but during the winter, that's definitely something that you'd want to be able to have. And that dehydrators can be noisy depending on the type of dehydrator that you have. So this is the fourth type of dehydrator, dehydration step as well, is actually a manufactured dehydrator. These can be picked up from the fairly inexpensive, like in the $20 range, and it goes all the way up to $200 plus range. So there is a wide variety of dehydrators that you can purchase. You can also pick up dehydrators in local thrift stores. And because people do have great ideas of dehydrating and then realize that they don't have them, so they move them on for a second life with somebody else. So types of dehydrators are manufacturers. You can also use your home oven as a dehydrator and then a microwave. So this dehydrator that's over here on the far left side is an Excalibur Dehydrator, and is one of the higher end dehydrators that are available on the market. And then the two that are over here on the right hand side are on the lower end. I'd say on the more feasibly economical scale. This Excalibur Dehydrator would be upwards of $200, whereas the other dehydrators here on the right would be maybe in the $20 to $60 range. So big difference in the price differences. They all work the same. The Excalibur has the heat coming from the back side, so the fan is located on the back, where these other round dehydrators that you have, the heat or the drying element, the heat element is coming from the bottom or on the top. So you have the top and bottom versus the back side. So the airflow is a little bit different in those. So the manufactured type of, let me go ahead and get these drawings cleared. Dehydrators is that they are low cost and inexpensive. The trays are flimsy and they could crack. And then you have the timers and temperature settings. So here's what they are. So again, we have the Excalibur version with the heating element in the back. And then these are some other type versions that you have. I think that's a Harvest is another version that's in there. And maybe I think I've heard of a Ronco, but and then this is a Armada kind, where these are the trays that you can slide in and out. And these are stackable trays where you can add more trays to them. But with these stackable tray versions, these are ones that you actually want to make sure that you rotate your trays through your process. So you can also use your home oven as a dehydrator. There is a learning curve with it. So I would do a small batch with that, but you can put your oven on the lowest setting and then prop the door open with a pot holder or lid. The goal is to dry your food and not bake it. So there is a learning curve and it can be a bit tricky with this. So maybe start with trying to do, say, fruit leather or something that's you don't mind if you have to get a little dry run on that per se. But it is possible to dry with your home oven. And then also with your microwave. But microwave drying is only really to be used for drying herbs. And it's not suitable for other types of food dehydration because you can actually burn your product very easily. And again, drying with your microwave is one of those skills that you're going to have to practice to become proficient in. So it's one of those things that you're going to have to do small batches and see what works best for your microwave, because our microwaves nowadays are, they vary with so many wattages. So it's hard to give directions immediately because your microwave, you may not know your wattage, or your microwave can run a little bit differently than the next person's microwave. So here we have other equipment and storage containers that you would want to have around when you're going to be dehydrating. So you're going to be needing some knives and cutting boards, some parchment paper, some jars, or other airtight containers for your storage after you finish drying your product. We're just going to kind of go over a little bit about dehydrating fruit and then, the basic steps for preparations, your settings, and your dehydration and storage. A quick and easy way to start dehydrating is dehydrating fruit. So you're going to wash and dry your produce. So you would wash it and then set it out to dry, or maybe paper towel dry that. And then you're going to cut or slice your produce evenly. If you use whole produce, you may need to puncture that to make sure that that air can penetrate in there. Depending on what type of product you're using, your directions will give you more specifics on if you need to puncture your item. For chunks and thicker slices, and then you want to really be cautious of having really thick chunks because it will take much longer for your product to dehydrate. And then it may not even dehydrate thoroughly. So your size of your slice does play a factor in that. And then you want to lay out on trays on a single layer and an evenly spaced. So what you have is that you see on these trays there. You don't want to pile them in one big pile. So you need to have them evenly spaced and on your dryer sheet. And then because these are going to actually shrink up and provide some more room for moving. And then you need to adjust your temperature on your dehydrator. What you have pictured here is like the faceplate, I believe, from a Excalibur Dehydrator. And this one has a built-in drying guide, but some of these other dehydrators may not have this on here. So you'd need to refer back to your manufacturer's directions on your settings, depending on what fruit that you have. But fruit typically would use a temperature of 135 degrees. Now, on an Excalibur, you have the ability to adjust your temperature, whereas on those other round dehydrators, you may not have the ability to adjust your temperatures. So that is one of the items that when you're paying for a higher end dehydrator, you have that ability, but that will not deter you from being able to dry in those other smaller units. You would just maybe have to watch those a little bit more closely. And then so you would set your timer if you have a timer, and then check periodically, because your smaller, thinner pieces are going to dry much faster than those larger pieces. Because I mean, let's face it, sometimes we have larger pieces of fruit and then smaller ones, and you want to preserve all of them. So storage and conditioning. So after you finish drying your food, you're going to put in your jars and you're going to label your jars. So just so you know what the date was that you completed your drying, because you always want to make sure that you use the oldest stuff first. And then you need to do what we call conditioning, which is place in your tightly closed container and leave out on the counter for a week. And then daily you want to shake your jar to make sure that you have the all the moisture out of your jar. And you'll know that you don't have the moisture out of the jar because right now you're going to be, during that 1 week, you're going to be looking for the beads of moisture at the top of the jar. And during the first couple of days, it would be expected, because these are not going to be 100% dry. There is going to be some moisture content in there. And then if you continue to see that moisture buildup on the lid of your jar here, you'll want to throw them back in the dehydrator for a little bit longer, because that moisture could actually cause your entire jar or your entire container to mold. So there is a very fine line with having enough moisture in your jar. Depending on what type of product that you have, you'll have a certain percentage level. It could vary on that. And then after a few days, if there's no beads of moisture, you're going to store it in a cool, dark, dry place. And if you have any doubtness about the dryness of that, you can always store it in your refrigerator. Your refrigerator will provide that long-term storage ability. And then you can also pasteurize any food product that's been exposed to insect infestation or larva. And how you would do that is by freezing it in an airtight container for at least 2 days. And doing that will kill off any products that you, any larva or infestation that you have, maybe if you were doing dried beans or something along those lines. That's where that might come into play. So here's a list of a few fruit items that would be one to go ahead and give a try first. So we have bananas, grapes that you would make into raisins, blueberries, strawberries, peaches, Asian pears, persimmons, and then also making fruit leather. It's really important that you realize that when you're dehydrating fruit, that there is going to be a color change. So the appearance won't be necessarily the appearance of a fresh piece of fruit, but it will certainly have the flavor of a fresh piece of fruit. So here's a few tips on dehydrating bananas. With bananas, you do want to wait until they're turning brown, because that's when their natural sugars are actually coming into play. You're going to cut them into a 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch slice. And then to prevent discoloration, if that's a concern for you, you can treat them with lemon juice or citric acid. You can add cinnamon or other spices. If you have a temperature ability on your dehydrator, set it for 135 degrees, and then you'll check them after 8 hours. When the slices won't bend easily and come close to breaking, that's when you know that your product is completely dehydrated. And then one average sized banana is going to come up with about a 1/2 cup of dried banana chips. Now, homemade raisins are very, very tasty, and they're very easy to do, but they do require some time involvement in there. So seedless grapes are the best to create your homemade raisins. But if you do have seeded grapes, you want to cut them in half and remove the seeds. And then to jumpstart your process there, you're going to go at a higher temperature for 8 hours and then reduce them down. Now, one thing that I did find, because I did actually make some homemade raisins, is that you may need to puncture your grape to be able to get that penetration, just because depending on what size grapes you have as well, it could take a long process for you to be able to do that. So if you come across a problem, you can feel free to reach out to the Master Food Preservers, and we can help discuss any conditions or issues that you might come across with. So when you're making grapes, blanching for 60 seconds is sometimes recommended. Not necessarily always a requirement, but there are different publications and different instructions on what's recommended and what's not. And then again, you don't need a dehydrator. You can use your vehicle if you or don't have a dehydrator. So don't be afraid to think outside the box and use the sun as your natural dehydrator or even your vehicle. And when you are using berries, where the blueberries, use parchment paper on the bottom of your tray, because those could fall through your tray if you have a larger holes in your tray. So for strawberries, you're going to slice them in half, more if they're a larger berry. And then if you have a temperature availability, 115 degrees if possible, just because they could burn quickly. So you want to keep an eye on those. And then here is a picture of an apple master so that you can make slices quick and easy. Not necessary, but if you have this tool in your kitchen supplies, it might be a way for you to use that. Again, car dehydration. Here's a picture of some persimmons. These were just sliced into wagon wheels and you removed any seeds. Now, fruit leather is also a quick way to get this done, and then it's easy prep. You're just going to have your fruit puree, about 3 cups, add about 1.5 tablespoons of lemon juice for the light color fruit to really help with the really drastic changes in the color. And then you can add sugar if you need sugar, depending on how your berries are to your taste. You'd want to make sure that you're using a solid tray insert or parchment paper, and then pour your fruit leather on. And then what you're going to do is spread your puree mash out to about 1/8 thickness, and then on the edges about 1/4 inch. And then you're going to dry this until there's no tackiness in your fruit leather and your product there. So the center of your tray may take a little bit longer. So that's why you want to make sure that that center really doesn't have any tackiness. And you'll be able to see the differences in your tray as far as what's dried and what's not. And it should peel away easily. So after you've completed that, and you can see here that it's nice and dried and the difference in the color, you can go ahead and roll it up and then cut them into slices. Making fruit leather is a quick and easy way to use your fruit that you have. You can even disguise some vegetables in there. And it's a great way to get the kids involved and engaged in the kitchen. And then you can store these in a closed jar for a few months, or you can put them in the freezer, and then you won't have any problems. If you're using nuts or nut butters in the blend, you want to store it in the refrigerator. So here's some other information about dehydration on the fruit, and then you can use a treatment, and often used for apricots and peaches because the discoloration is extreme in those types of fruits. Sulfuring, it must be done outside. I don't have a lot of experience with sulfuring, so be careful that, because there are a lot of people that do have sensitivities to sulfur dioxide. Dipping, this also is a sodium bisulfate, and it can be done inside, but it does has problematic issues if you have sensitivities to sulfur. But you don't have to treat your fruit. And then for vegetables, blanching is required for most veggies to stop the enzyme action. There's no blanching requirement for green peppers, onions, garlic, mushrooms, and okra. It also relaxes the tissues so that drying can be done on a faster type. So drying can be done faster, and then it protects the vitamins and colors of your vegetables. Steam blanching, it's not as good as water blanching, but is also an option for you. So water blanching is very a straightforward process. You can add about a quarter teaspoon of citric acid to a quart of water to prevent darkening. You're going to boil your water. You're going to cut your vegetable pieces and you can place them in a cheesecloth or a mesh bag or into a colander. Then you're going to dip them into your boiling water. At that point, your boiling water won't be boiling anymore. But once your boiling water has returned, that's when you would start your timing process. And depending on the type of vegetable that you have, there's different recommendations as far as the length of time that you would need to have. So in our resources, you'd be able to get that information. And then this is some information about Kale Chips. I'm running a little over on time. So Kale Chips is a quick and easy way to turn something that you would think that is not edible into a nice, delicious treat for your classroom or for your family. You're going to wash your kale thoroughly, tear it into bite-sized pieces, put into a large bag, add a couple of tablespoons of virgin olive oil, twist the bag closed, shake it, and then go ahead and just make sure that the leaves are completely covered, that the leaves are covered with oil, and then you can add more oil if necessary, but may or may not be required. You're going to spread the leaves on the trays, sprinkle with a little sea salt, and then nutritional yeast on top, and then place the trays in the dehydrator. Again, if your dehydrator has a temperature, you'd set it at 125 degrees, and it takes about 18 to 24 hours to get that done. And then you can check periodically through there. Then you'd store them in Ziploc bags. It's a nice alternative to chips. And if you're into a more complex recipe, this one's just very easy, very basic. Here is a site here for you to get more information, and I'll make sure that I get that dropped into the chat. Air drying is fairly easy. You're hanging up in small bundles. You can use rubber bands. If you can do this in a dark area, you just want to make sure that you have good air circulation to make sure that you're getting your product dried. So for a dehydrator, drying between 90 and 100 degrees if you have a temperature availability, between 4 and 8 hours for your herbs. And then in the microwave, it's adjustable power levels, And then again, as I had mentioned earlier, just be careful because it can burn very easy. And then you would store in a glass jar labeled in your dark pantry. Make sure that you don't have any discoloration going on after you've dried your herb. So a few little things here about using dehydrated foods. You can eat them as they are. You can rehydrate them and then soak or cook them. That's how you would get them rehydrated with some warm water and let them sit out there. And then do not add sugar until the fruit is tender. So if you have some tart fruit, the sugar will actually toughen it up if you add it too early. So it could make it a little bit chewier. You can put your dried fruit in oatmeals, cookies, breads, cobblers, pies, or puddings. For dehydrated vegetables, you can powder them, or you can use them as the chips that you've made, and you can put them in soups, casseroles, sauces, and stews. And then they can be served alone with butters or sauces or herbs. And then just another mention that after you rehydrate your fruits or vegetables, that spoilage can occur quickly. So make sure that you are keeping an eye on that and that you don't leave them out on your counter while after you've rehydrated them, that you get them stored in the refrigerator, because spoilage will and can and will happen. So other uses that we have here, rehydrate adds to salads or side dishes, marinate flavored tofu or veggie or soy products, and a blender to make your veggie powders, which can be very expensive if you purchase on your own, but you can make them and then hide them into your smoothies. You can replace your grain flour with veggie powder. Vegetable chips you can use for dips or just substitute with your chips. You can add to burgers or meatloaf, soups and stews, put it in baked bread, or you can make sauce if you've done tomato powder with 1 part powdered veggies to 3 parts water. And then here is some information for free resources that are available, and I'll drop these also into the chat. National Center for Home Food Preservation is where the master food preservers have their guidelines to provide research-based information out for people who would love to learn more about food preservation. And then on our MFP UCANR website, we have an area here that's under resources. And if you click on there, you can get video publications as well as publications and recipes. And thank you very much for enjoying our presentation today. And I'm going to answer some questions that I see here. So
Can I try to answer the questions? I am a newly certified master food preserver, and I've been contemplating the first question. Can I give it a try as an answer?
Yes, please do.
Okay. All right. This is my master food preserver practice. So I think you could tape a silica packet in for long-term storage, but if you do see any moisture, then that's a sign that they're not dried enough and they do need to come back out. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, do you have anything to add? That was all I could come up with.
No, yeah, you can use those. It really does depend on what your preference level and availability for working with that product is. It is a great way for you to be able to extend something for a longer shelf life, but you do need to be aware that that using that as if depending on how you've got that stored, if you possibly break the packet that's in there and it gets on your food, that could create a problem. So maybe if you're using that packet, maybe avoid using that Ziploc bagging, maybe use a stronger, like a plastic container or a glass container so that you don't have the possibility of rupturing that product or that packet. I guess it really does depend on where you're using it in your pantry. If that's not a concern, then it shouldn't be an issue.
And for using plastic bags, aren't some bags kind of not really airtight, or is that not true? Could you store your dehydrated products in a Ziploc bag?
You can store them in your Ziploc bag, but it's not as a good recommendation. Like depending on like my fruit leather, I will store in a Ziploc bag. But again, my fruit leather is not something that really sits around for 5 years or 2 years or anything like that. So depending on what your needs are or what your intention is, that may or may not be a good way for you to store your product.
Okay, well, that was a great presentation. Does anybody else? I see lots of thank yous in the chat. And does anybody else have any other questions? Otherwise, I'll probably stop recording.